Today we're going to be looking at one of the most powerful builds ever because I mean just look at the damage this thing does. Yeah, I wasn't kidding. And of course, as you just saw, it revolves around the Dragon Cult Incantations, and more specifically one of the new DLC items being the Priestess Heart, which allows you to become a dragon yourself, which is one of the main contributing factors as to how we're doing so much damage. So as always, sit back, relax, and let me show you how you create this insane lightning build. Now, as always, when we start these things off, I'm just going to let you know of a few items we're going to need, and as I said in the intro, this build heavily revolves around the Dragon Cult Incantations, so we're going to want to grab some items that can passively buff these incantations, and the first item of which is in fact going to be the seal that we're going to be using, and that is none other than the Gavel Stone seal. This seal will buff our overall damage output with Dragon Cult Incantations by 15%, and that just happens as long as we're wielding this seal in our hands. But then we also want to be grabbing ourselves the Flower Stone Gavel, as well as of course the Priestess Heart. The reason why we want to get ourselves the Flower Stone Gavel as well is because it has a unique Ash of War, where it will actually lower your enemy's lightning defenses, and it is also chargeable, so if you charge this Ash of War, it will lower their defenses even more. But then of course we also want the Dragon Priestess Heart so that we can transform into a dragon and give ourselves a plus 20% buff to all Dragon Cult Incantations. So I'm obviously just going to quickly show you how you get all three of these items, and to get the seal, all you simply need to do is head to Lyondale Capital, and just to be clear, you need to grab this before you turn the capital into the Capital of Ash. If you've done that and you haven't got the seal already, you either need to make a brand new character or go into New Game Plus to get this, because you do need to go to the West Capital Rampart side of Grace and drop down to this little area if you head down the stairs, where there's going to be two knights, one wielding a bow and arrow and one wielding a sword and shield. Kill the one with the sword and shield and he will drop the Gavel Stone seal. But for the other two items, both the Gavel and also the Priestess Heart, they too are also relatively simple to get. I say simple like it isn't a big ask, but all you need to do is defeat Bale in the DLC, which, yes, I'm aware I've just said all you need to do is defeat him, but luckily, again, just a little tidbit, I'm not going to show you the fight. If you do actually equip yourself with the Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike as well as the Gavel seal, you can actually defeat him in just 2 or 3 hits just simply with those two items alone. So it is relatively simple as long as you've got the right build. But essentially, once you've beaten Bale, you can then head down to the Communion Altar where the Dragon Priestess is residing, and as long as you did not give her Tiola's concoction, her body will be there with both the Gavel and her heart as items to pick up from, which of course will give us all of the necessary items for this particular build. And if you need a full guide on how to get to Bale and how to make sure you definitely do this questline correctly, I will leave my full guide in the description down below, so feel free to check that out because you can mess that up. Once you've got all three of these items, you are pretty much good to go, and of course I'll show you the stats and the talismans you need to pair with these items in a moment. But just to also quickly explain how you use the Priestess Heart, to turn yourself into a dragon using this item, you need to use it whilst you're not wearing any armor. As I'm going to show you in the background right now, if you do try to use it whilst wearing armor, it is not going to work. But, of course, when you take all of your armor off and use the item again, you will then transform into the Dragon Priestess, which does give you a very slight increase in damage negation, whilst also buffing a few of your resistances. And in order to activate the 20% buff to Dragon Cult Incantations, you need to use the Dragon Heart again whilst you are transformed into the Priestess. So yes, just to be abundantly clear, you do not have a passive 20% buff just naturally whilst you're in this dragon form. You do need to use the heart again, which you will see the buff icon appear obviously just below your health bar, and this buff does last about a minute, which I know doesn't really sound like a long time, but when we're dealing the damage that we're dealing, it is more than enough time to last any boss fight in the game. And I know I'm going to upset a few of you because I'm not going to show this build in the DLC, but for those of you that do know, especially if you get your Shadow Tree rating up to around about about 15, 16, you're going to be doing similar numbers to the DLC bosses that I'm doing to the base game bosses, and where we're basically buffing everything to do with Dragon Cult incantations, we actually do have a wide variety of spells to use, which can actually make this build extremely fun to play with, because of course we can go around one-shotting everything with the Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, as again, you're probably going to be seeing multiple times in the background, but we can also switch it up by using Honed Bolt, the regular Lightning Spear, and even the new Night Lightning Spear, which can actually break enemies' poises really quickly too. So like I say, there is a lot of versatility thanks to all of the passive buffs that we have specifically with Dragon Cult incantations. But of course, to mimic this crazy damage that we're doing, you're of course going to need the stats for this particular build. So here they are up on screen for you, and as always, it is a level 150 character, and as you can see, we've got 50 points into Vigor, 25 Mind, 21 Endurance, 14 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 9 Intelligence, 80 Faith, and then 15 Arcane. Now again, just to explain those stats a little bit more, where I mentioned at the beginning, I am going to be using the Flowerstone Gavel as a secondary weapon to mainly utilize its insane Ash of War, which actually gives a 12 or 15% debuff to lightning damage to our enemies whenever we hit them with that Ash of War. The 15 Arcane, 15 Dexterity, and 14 Strength are basically the minimum requirements for that particular weapon, so that's why we've got those stats in this build. And then of course, where we're focusing purely on the incantations, we want to buff our faith as much as possible, which is why I took it to the final soft cap of 80 before then giving ourselves a nice healthy amount of mind as well as endurance, just so that we can use these spells without having to worry too much about whether or not we've got enough stamina to use it and then roll out the way, or of course run out of mind very quickly. But if you also want to buff this build up to a level 200, which is going to be more than enough with this particular build, I do recommend running these particular stats, so realistically upgrading your Vigor, Mind, Endurance, as well as your Faith to its final hard cap, because then you'll have the best mixture of the most damage that you're doing with the incantations, as well as a load of Mind, so you can just keep spamming away at your enemies as much as you please, whilst also giving yourself a little bit more protection with the increased Vigor, because obviously where we're not wearing any armor, there are times where you are going to die in 2 or 3 hits against certain bosses, so obviously just bear that in mind when running this particular build. And again, where I'm tailoring this build to get the best damage output possible, where we've got so many points into Faith, that of course allows us to use both Golden Val and the Howl of Shibiri as our 2 main buffs, because we'll be getting a plus 15% and a plus 25% extra damage buff with those respective spells. And again, no matter the level of your character that you want to use this build with, these are going to be the talismans that I highly recommend that you use. And again, feel free to pause it and write these down. But of course, first of all, I would recommend that you run the Godfrey icon, because essentially all of the lightning incantations as well as the Flowerstone Gavel can all be charged, and whenever you do that, you will get a plus 15% extra damage buff when you use their charged versions. But then I highly recommend running the Lightning Scorpion Charm, because again, where we're heavily focused into Dragon Cult incantations, everything that we're doing pretty much is lightning damage, so with this on, we've just got a constant 12% extra damage boost. But then I also recommend running the Ritual Swords Talisman, because again, as long as we're at full HP, we'll be getting a passive 10% buff to all of our damage types. And then I also highly recommend running the Aged One's Exaltation, because where we're running the Howl of Shibiri, we can just simply use that to proc madness on ourselves, and whenever we do that, we will get a 20% buff to our overall damage output for 30 seconds when we have the Aged One's Exaltation equipped. Now of course, if you want to play things a little bit more safe, or you don't quite have the Aged One's Exaltation yet, then you can indeed use talismans like the Flux Canvas Talisman that will give you a plus 8% damage boost to any incantations. Or if you want to run something a bit more defensive, feel free to use things like the Dragon Crest Talismans, or of course more specifically the Dragon Crest Great Shield, because that will obviously help with your survivability, especially if you're trying to use things like the Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike, where you have to obviously get a little bit close to your enemies to pull that full thing off. And then just to round off this build with our Wonder Physick, I highly recommend that you run both the Lightning Shrouding Crack tier, and then again, depending on your stat in your Faith, you can either run the Faith Knot tier, so basically if you're level 150, you can pump that up to 90 instead of 80 in those stats, or if you are running a level 200 build or have max Faith in your build, then you can use things like the Stone Barb cracked tier to again break your enemies' poisons much quicker, or if you don't mind switching out your Ritual Swords Talisman for something else, you can use the Blood Sucking cracked tier to give you a plus 20% extra damage buff, and like I say, maybe swap out the Ritual Swords Talisman for something like the Flox Canvas Talisman, as you will never be at full HP with the Blood Sucking cracked tier in, as you'll always be taking damage to get that 20% extra damage buff. But just to be clear, if you are a level 150 build and copying this build exactly, then definitely pair the Lightning Shrouding cracked tier with the Faith Knot tier to obviously mimic the damage outputs that you're seeing on screen. And these damage outputs are stupid, as you have been seeing throughout this video. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike is nothing new, and we already knew that this incantation can break the game, but with this new Priestess Heart and the buffs that come along with it, it pretty much makes any lightning incantation extremely powerful, because you'll be doing sort of around 3,000-4,000 damage just with a normal charged lightning spear. And if you're anything like me and love using the lightning incantations and being some kind of lightning god in the lands between, then this is definitely a build that I recommend using, as it is indeed quite possibly the most broken build to exist in the game. And just like that, that is obviously how you create this insane Draconic Lightning God build. I still don't quite know what to call it, but either way, it is extremely broken, and like I just said there, if you like lightning incantations, then I definitely recommend that you give this a go. Also, just quickly, I want to point out, because of course, where we're using the Priestess Heart, we haven't really got any armor. If you have got the DLC and you work your way through it to the Blacklight Catacombs, you can indeed pick up the Death Knight's armor, and if you pick that armor set up, you can actually increase your Dragon Cult incantation damage by 8%, which of course isn't quite the 20% that the Dragon Priestess Heart gives you, but by having that armor set, obviously you'll be less vulnerable to your enemies and can therefore withstand obviously the harder fights a lot easier. So if you are struggling just using the Dragon Priestess Heart, where you've got bugger all armor, definitely invest into something like the Death Knight's armor, or even just the Rakshasa armor, because again, that will give you a plus 8% boost as long as you're using the full set. But otherwise, if you followed all of the items and the stats and everything in this video, you'll be doing the tremendous amount of damage that I was doing, which of course can delete every single boss in the entire game. But with all that said, obviously, thank you all so much for watching this video. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this, and of course, if you have done, if you don't mind me asking you to leave a like rating down below, that would be greatly appreciated. And also, if you're new around here or you find yourself coming back to the channel and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, definitely make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, because then that way you won't miss out on crazy builds like this. You can also get yourself notified whenever these builds release by hitting that bell after hitting the subscribe button, and on top of that, you'll also be helping us get to 30,000 subscribers. So yes, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe down below. But other than that, obviously let me know what you think of this build. If you've got any ways to improve it, again, feel free to let us know in the comments. But other than that, I've said more than enough for this video. So again, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate all of your support and the fact that you're making it to the end of these videos. I hope you're having a great day. Obviously, have fun with this build, and I guess I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.